The bullet wound was not the first betrayal, but the most honest one. It announced its intent with a sharp, percussive crack and followed through with a burning, tearing sensation. It was a clean act of violence, a statement of fact. You are not safe. I would only later learn that the most insidious betrayals are quiet, planned in secret, and delivered with a smile. The one from that foreign desert was immediate and physically painful. But the one from back home, the one I hadn't even discovered yet, would be the one that nearly killed me. I had been in Kazakhstan for 8 months. 8 months of scorching days and freezing nights, of the endless, flat expanse of the desert, and the rhythmic clang of steel against steel. The job was building infrastructure for a global oil company, and the money was more than I'd ever imagined. Triple what I made as a foreman back in Oregon. It was for our future, Marlowe's and mine. The old dream of paying off the house, starting a family, and finally taking that trip to Italy she'd talked about since college. It all felt within reach. Every night, without fail, I'd call her. 9 p.m., my time, 10 a.m., hers. I'd picture her with her morning coffee, the sun slanting through the kitchen window, as she told me about her day at the marketing firm, the latest drama with her boss, Patricia, and the trivial, comforting gossip of our small neighborhood. Those calls were my lifeline, my only connection to the life I was building, and the woman who was waiting for me. Her voice was the anchor that kept me from drifting into the emptiness of my lonely days. The day my world shifted started innocently enough, just like any other. We were on a pipeline 40 miles outside Almaty. The air was thick with dust and the smell of diesel. Local conflicts had been a low-grade hum in the background of our lives, something we read about on our phones, not something we ever expected to see. We were contractors, not soldiers. We thought we were insulated, protected. But the sharp crack of the rifle shot was like a hammer blow to the silence. It echoed across the arid land, a single horrifying sound. A moment later, a searing pain exploded in my shoulder, and I was spun around, crashing to the hot, unyielding sand. The world began to close in, and a high-pitched ringing drowned out the panicked shouts of my coworker, Davis. I could feel the warm, thick liquid soaking into my shirt and the ground beneath me. The bullet had ripped through my shoulder and caught an artery, and I was bleeding out faster than I could comprehend. The medics who reached us were shouting in a language I didn't know, their faces a blur of urgency and concern. They loaded me into a cramped, dusty vehicle that smelled of antiseptic and fear. The hospital in Almaty was a world away from the gleaming medical centers back home. It was old and understaffed, but the tired, skilled hands of the doctor, a woman named Dr. Boa, managed to hold back the tide. Through a translator, she explained that the bullet had done more damage than they initially believed, and I would need multiple surgeries. All I could think about was Marlowe. I begged them to call her, to tell her I was okay, that I was alive. But their international calling system was down, and my phone had been lost in the chaos. For 3 long, agonizing weeks, I was a ghost in my own body. Surgeries blurred into fevers, which gave way to infections. I fought battles in my sleep, my body struggling to knit itself back together. The one coherent thought that tethered me to reality was my wife. As soon as I was stable enough to hold a phone, I borrowed one from a nurse and dialed our number. A cold, automated voice answered, "The number you have dialed is no longer in service." I redialed, my hands shaking, convinced I had made a mistake. The same message repeated. A cold dread, far worse than any pain from my wound, began to snake up my spine. I called her office, and a sympathetic-sounding Patricia answered. Her voice was guarded as she told me that Marlowe had quit 2 weeks ago, with no notice. She just didn't show up. No forwarding address, no explanation. I felt the floor drop out from under me. Something was terribly wrong, and I was thousands of miles away, completely powerless. My company, seeing my distress and recognizing my stable condition, arranged for my medical evacuation. The flight back to Portland felt like an eternity. Each hour was a new hell of speculation and fear. I imagined every plausible tragedy, an accident, an illness, a family emergency. Every scenario felt agonizing, but they all at least made sense, I was entirely unprepared for the reality I was about to face. I took a taxi directly from the airport to our house. The old familiar route was a blur of nervous anticipation. When we turned onto our street, my heart was hammering against my ribs. But then I saw it. A different car in the driveway, a different color on the front door, and different curtains in the windows. A family I didn't know was moving around inside, their lives playing out in the place where mine should have been. I walked up to the front door, my legs feeling like lead, and a kind man named Robert answered. He explained that he'd bought the house 6 weeks ago. A cash sale, he said, handled through a real estate attorney. He mentioned the previous owner had been very eager to close quickly. 6 weeks ago. That was just 3 weeks after I had been shot. While I was lying in a hospital bed in a foreign country, fighting for my life, Marlo was selling our home. She was liquidating our dreams, our memories, everything we had built. I stood on the sidewalk for an hour, my gaze fixed on the house, unable to move. Everything was gone, sold to strangers. A fresh grief washed over me, a silent wave that had nothing to do with my physical wound. But Robert, sensing my profound shock, mentioned something else. He said the seller had left a few boxes in the garage, things she couldn't fit into her car. He'd been meaning to donate them, but hadn't gotten around to it. "Would you like to see if there's anything you'd like?" he asked. I numbly followed him, my mind unable to process the words. In those boxes, I found fragments of my former life. Our wedding photos, my college diplomas, my father's watch. Things that should have been too precious to leave behind. But at the very bottom of the last box, I found something that turned my blood to ice. A letter. It wasn't addressed to me. It was for someone named Marcus. The handwriting was unmistakably Marlo's, but the words were from a stranger. She wrote about feeling trapped, about waiting for the perfect moment to escape. She spoke of how my long-term contract overseas was a gift, the perfect opportunity for her to start over. And she wrote about love, a love that was clearly not meant for me. The letter was dated 2 days after I had been shot. 2 days after she must have received the news that her husband was in a hospital, critically injured. I sat on the cold concrete floor of that stranger's garage, holding that letter, and finally understood the full scope of the betrayal. It wasn't a spontaneous act born of desperation. She'd been planning her escape long before I ever stepped on that plane to Kazakhstan. The woman I had called every night, the woman I had trusted with my entire future, was a ghost. The bullet wound in my shoulder, the one that had caused so much pain and blood, was a simple, honest injury. This was a different kind of wound entirely. This was a psychic injury, a spiritual laceration that no surgery or antibiotic could heal. I hired a private investigator to fill in the blanks. The facts were brutally simple. Marcus worked at her company. The investigator found credit card receipts and hotel stays, a whole secret life unfolding while I was half a world away, trying to build us a future. They'd moved to Seattle, started new jobs, and were living off the money from the sale of our home. I could have confronted them. I could have demanded explanations, fought for what was stolen, but as I sat in a hotel room in Portland, looking at a grainy photo of them laughing together, I realized something. The bullet in Kazakhstan hadn't been the betrayal that nearly killed me. It had been the betrayal that saved me. It had stripped away the illusions of my life, revealing the rot underneath. It forced me to face the truth, not in a way I would have chosen, but in a way that was impossible to ignore. Some wounds heal. Others, however, teach you who you are when everything you thought you knew gets stripped away. The person who emerges from that hospital bed, who has faced the complete collapse of his world, is stronger than the one who got shot.